Welcome back to Fear Begins. In tonight's episode, I will be sharing 10 true disturbing stories from Kentucky. These are not urban legends, not campfire tales. These are real encounters that will make you question what truly waits for you out there in the dark. Before we begin, make sure you subscribe to Fear Begins, like this video, and share it with your friends. And let me know in the comments where you are watching from. It is always chilling to see how far these stories travel. Now, let us begin. Story 1. The delivery. I was 19 when I took that order. At the time, I had only been working at Harold's Pizza for maybe 3 weeks, 4 at most. But already, I had logged more miles on backroads than I ever thought. I would doubt most of our deliveries went out to the quieter corners of Bignell County. That was where the roads narrowed, where the houses sat further apart, and where the addresses felt less like directions and more like riddles. You might expect pizza orders to pile up downtown, but no. For some reason, folks out in the woods craved pepperoni and sausage like it was a lifeline. The money was decent, especially with tips. But the drives, they tested you. Sometimes, if you went far enough, your GPS started second-guessing itself. The roads twisted endlessly, and even the cows out in the fields seemed to stare like they knew you were lost. Out there you had to rely on memory mailbox art, the curve of a road, or the one yard where some eccentric had planted a forest of broken toilets. That Friday night was slow. The kind of night where the ovens hummed louder than the phone. By 10:30, the other drivers had clocked out. I was halfway through scrubbing my name off the delivery log when the bell rang. One last order. It was simple sausage pizza, no drinks, no sides. The ticket said East Finch Road. Nothing about it raised alarm, except the call itself was strange. The guy on the other end hung up halfway through the confirmation. Still, I was 19. I was bored. And mopping the soda machine sounded worse than a late-night drive. So I bagged the pizza, zipped it up, and loaded my beat-up Civic. That car was practically one pothole away from retirement. The handbrake had been broken for months, but I had learned to improvise. My rule was simple: park in gear, wheels turned against the curb if there was one, and avoid steep hills. Always, I punched in the address. The little blue dot on my phone hesitated, then committed. About 30 minutes. Highway, then county roads. Then, whatever came after that dot, the farther I drove, the darker it became. Streetlights vanished, houses disappeared. The road itself felt less like a road and more like something I was trespassing on. By the time I passed a rust-stained water tower with the word Callaway barely readable, my phone buzzed no service. That always added weight to the drive. It made you think, what if the car broke down? What if someone stepped out from the trees and flagged me down? Out here, nobody would know. After a few more turns, I found Deer Hollow Road. Calling it a road was generous. It was little more than 2 deep ruts carved through the dirt. Trees leaned in on both sides, branches scraping against the roof like claws. I crawled forward, headlights bouncing across the forest that looked more like a tunnel of shadows. 9 miles. That was how long I crept through that wilderness maze before I saw it. The house. It sat at the bottom of a slope, half swallowed by trees. The roof sagged, the windows were either broken or boarded, and what might have once been a chicken coop lay collapsed on its side. The driveway was cracked but still passable. I rolled down, gravel crunching under my tires, engine humming like it was nervous too. I kept the headlights on. I kept the engine running. Partly because of the broken handbrake, but mostly because something about this place felt wrong. No porch light. No sign of life. Just a door cracked open, like it was waiting for me. At the top of the drive sat a pickup. An old Ford, caked in mud. No plates. One mirror dangling by a wire. It looked abandoned, or worse, like it was not abandoned at all. I sat there for a moment, one hand on the gear shift, staring. And then, deep in my chest, something whispered. Don't. It was not a voice exactly. More like a warning you feel rather than hear. But it was just a pizza, right? I grabbed the bag, slipped the car into neutral with the wheel cocked left so it would not roll, and stepped out. The night air hit me like a wall, damp, still. Every footstep sounded too loud. My breath fogged in the cold as I walked the gravel. Pathed out one window caught my eye. The glass was smudged, as if someone had rested their forehead against it from the inside. That detail clung to me. I knocked. The sound came back muffled, like the wood itself was rotting. At first, nothing. Then a flicker dim light, like an old bulb stuttering on its last legs. And then he appeared, tall, broad shoulders. Bald head, tattoos crawling up from under a stained tank top. His skin looked stretched thin, unnatural. He did not move, like someone surprised. He moved like someone who had been waiting. He stared at me, dry, flat, no blink. And then, the faint curl of a smile. I lifted the box. "Pizza," my voice cracked. He did not respond, did not nod. He just stood there, watching. I leaned slightly, trying to peek inside, and what I saw made my stomach drop. The house was empty. Completely empty. No furniture, no curtains, no lamps. Not even dust, just bare wooden floors. Dark streaks ran across them, like something heavy had been dragged. Then he moved. Slowly, deliberately, one hand slipping behind his back. Every nerve in me screamed run, but I stood frozen. My brain was yelling while my body refused to obey. I thought of my mom warning me this job was not worth it. I thought of my girlfriend joking about me delivering to a horror movie house. And I thought about how pathetic it would be to die over a $10 sausage pizza. That was when I heard it. Gravel shifting behind me, I turned. My car was moving, slowly, steadily rolling backwards down the slope. Its headlights swung toward the road, the incline dragging it away. The man's smile changed. It dropped like something had been stolen from him. He looked at the car, then back at me. And then, without a word, he pulled a crumpled $20 bill from his pocket. He held it out. I handed him the pizza. He took it. Shut the door with a heavy thud. I ran. I sprinted down the path, yanked open the drifting car, threw myself inside, slammed it into first, and hit the gas. The tires spun, caught, and then I was flying down Deer Hollow Road, heart hammering so hard I thought it might break my ribs. I did not look back until I reached a crossroads with a streetlight glowing overhead and my phone finally buzzing back to life. When I told my manager Monica what happened, she did not laugh. She called the sheriff. Later, the sheriff called her back. That house, the one I had just delivered to, had been condemned for over a year. Fire damage, roof unstable, owned by the bank. No one was supposed to be living there. No one, after that night, I started carrying a pocket knife. Monica began sticking GPS trackers on all the delivery bags, and I never ever took a route that far into the woods again. We had just settled into a rental house in a small town called Marlow, Kentucky. My girlfriend and I wanted something simple, quiet, affordable, with a patch of yard where the kids could run. A place that didn't echo with upstairs neighbors stomping at midnight. This house wasn't perfect, but it had potential. 2 small bedrooms, a cramped spare room that we quickly turned into our little sanctuary. Her violin and guitars rested neatly on one side, while my battered desktop and stacks of RPG books filled the other. It felt like a fresh start, a chance to breathe. From the front window, I could watch the road slope down toward the bus route. Every afternoon around 3, yellow school buses trundled by, spilling out kids with backpacks bouncing, their laughter cutting through the quiet. I sip lukewarm coffee and watch them from the couch. For a brief second, it all felt normal, safe even. Maybe that's why I remember it so clearly, because it was the last piece of normal I'd feel for a long time. Across the street, standing only 50 feet from our door, was an old wooden church. Not grand, not wholly, just weary. Its paint peeled in strips, its siding sagged, and its steeple leaned slightly to the right, as though it had survived too many storms and finally decided to rest. On Sundays, the gravel lot filled with cars, but during the week it sat silent, a hollow shell. Most people probably thought it gave the neighborhood charm. To us, it felt like a watchtower, a reminder that we were being observed, judged, displayed. We didn't hide who we were. A sticker with a pentacle and a cheeky caption on the front door. A wind chime made of deer antlers hanging by the porch. Small things, but enough to mark us as outsiders in Marlow. And outsiders are noticed. A few days after moving in, I saw it mud smeared high up the side of our house. Not splashed from a car, thrown, as if someone had hurled a fistful of wet dirt at the wall with intent. My girlfriend Mira saw it too. She crossed her arms, her jaw tightening. "They don't want us here," she said. I couldn't argue. She knew towns like this. So did I. It wasn't the first time welcome wagons came bearing hostility. Instead of pie, Mira worked long shifts at the clinic. I stayed home with our boys, JJ and Neil. The days fell into rhythm, chaotic breakfasts, bribing kids through schoolwork, refereeing fights worthy of the UN. By afternoon, the house exhaled. The kids would play in the yard, and I'd finally breathe. One afternoon, I crouched near the porch with Neil, watching a spider weave a web between two railings. His small voice narrated every movement, pointing with wide-eyed wonder. For a while, I forgot the church even existed. Until the cars arrived, first a black SUV, then a maroon sedan, then another. Within 10 minutes, the gravel lot across the street was full. 10, maybe 12 cars, lined with unsettling neatness. Not Sunday, not Wednesday, not a funeral. These weren't dressed for ceremony. It didn't feel like worship. It felt like a gathering. The church doors creaked open. They filed out in clusters. My eyes caught on the first group, a man, a woman, and two little girls. The girls were identical. Same braids, same dresses, moving in perfect unison. Not in the charming twin way, but rehearsed, mechanical, like dolls wound up to walk. Behind them came two men who made my stomach tighten. Tall, rail thin, their faces sunken, collars hanging loose around their necks. They moved with deliberate slowness, every step heavy with something that didn't belong in daylight. Neil noticed them too. With childlike innocence, he waved, "Hello." His voice rang out like a stone tossed into a still pond. I forced a polite smile and raised a hand. The adults ignored us. But the girls didn single quotes T. Both turned at once. Their blank stares froze me where I stood. One of them slowly raised her hand, a delayed, broken attempt at returning Neil's wave. Then snap. One of the gaunt men seized her wrist, shoving it down with sharp precision. Not protective, but punishing. My gut dropped. I told Neil to head inside. He obeyed without protest, thinking it was snack time. JJ was already at the window, watching, waiting. I stayed where I was, curiosity gnawing at me. The kind that whispers, "If you don't ask now, you'll never know." I crossed the street. The man who seemed like the father sat in the driver's seat. "Hey," I called, forcing cheer into my voice. "I'm Danny, just moved in across the road." He turned his head. His eyes met mine. No words, no anger, just a weight. A pressure so heavy it prickled across my skin. I smiled anyway. "You've got two beautiful girls." One of the twins tilted her head. Her voice came flat, chilling. "We're not for sale." I blinked, confused. Before I could respond, the gaunt man in the back repeated it, deliberate, almost ritualistic. "They're not for sale." I laughed nervously, shaking it off. "Of course not. I just meant maybe you'd like to come over sometime. Coffee, maybe. Let the kids play." That's when the mother stepped out. She tore off her sunglasses and sliced me with a glare sharp enough to draw blood. Her voice was venom. "My girls won't be caught dead with your boys." She stepped closer, her words spitting like fire. "I know what you are, lesbians, heathens, devil worshippers." Each word landed like a curse. Her voice rose. "God sees you, he will strike you down." She threw her hands skyward. "You will not buy my children. Their souls belong to him." The sound tore through the empty street, shrill, rehearsed, unhinged. My legs trembled. I muttered something like, "All right then," and turned back toward my house. Not running, but not steady either. Her voice chased me all the way, spilling scripture, threats, curses. Inside, JJ and Neil were still pressed to the window, their eyes wide. I shut the door, leaned against it, trying to catch my breath. And then Neil, clutching his juice box, looked up at me with the innocent curiosity only a child could carry. "Mommy," he whispered, "if you buy those kids, can I keep one in my closet?" And that was the end of it. My cousin Caleb asked me to look after his hunting cabin for a couple of weeks while he was away on a work trip. I said yes without even thinking about it. Caleb and I grew up like brothers, and honestly, I figured it would be a good excuse to get out of town, clear my head, and spend some time surrounded by nothing but woods. The cabin did not require much attention. He told me there were no real chores, no utilities to mess with. Just keep it locked, check in every now and then, and make sure nobody tried to break in or mess with it while he was gone. It was in a remote patch of Kentucky, about an hour outside a tiny town called Weston. Weston was the kind of place you could drive through in under 5 minutes, just a post office, a diner, and not much else. From there, it was still another 15 miles of winding gravel roads, cutting through old farmland that had slowly been reclaimed by thick woods. The kind of area where GPS stops trying to help halfway through, and you are left with memory, handwritten notes, and instinct. The cabin itself was nothing fancy. A squat little structure of gray, weather-beaten timber sitting on short stilts with a porch that leaned slightly to one side. The roof sagged like it was always begging for one more nail. Over the years, Caleb had patched it up, replaced a few windows, installed a working wood stove, and added a tiny bathroom. But even with those improvements, the place still felt unfinished, built for function, not comfort. There was a loft with one bedroom, a main living room with a kitchen nook, and barely a signal for cell service. The only spot where you might catch a bar or two was 30 feet uphill by a crooked pine tree, and even then, it was unreliable. When I pulled up, Caleb tossed me the keys and gave a quick rundown. Where the spare firewood was stacked, how to reset the well pump if it sputtered, and so on. But then he hesitated. For a moment, he looked like he was debating whether to tell me something. Finally, he did. "Just don't go wandering at night," he said. I laughed, assuming he was joking. "What? Coyotes or something?" But he did not smile. He wasn't trying to scare me. He was serious. All he said was, "Just don't." And with that, he climbed into his truck and drove off. The first day was calm, peaceful, even. I unpacked groceries, stacked wood by the stove, and walked along the tree line to get a feel for the land. The forest stretched endlessly in every direction, dark and untouched. From the porch, you could turn a full circle and not see a single road, house, or power line. By dusk, I was sitting on the porch with a beer in hand, legs kicked up on the railing, listening to the wind through the trees. No sirens, no engines, no background noise, just silence so deep it made my ears ring. When I finally went inside and locked the doors, I remember thinking it was too quiet, like the forest itself was holding its breath. The second night, that feeling grew heavier. I had fallen into a routine: simple dinner, some reading, then checking every lock before heading upstairs. I double-locked both doors, tugged the shutters to make sure they were latched, then crawled into bed under an old quilt Caleb had left folded at the foot. I must have been asleep a couple hours when I woke to a sound faint, but clear, the groan of wood on the porch. Like weight pressing onto the loose board near the stairs, I froze, heart pounding, ears straining. But after that, nothing. No footsteps, no knock, no voice. Just that one sound, then silence. I told myself it was probably an animal, a raccoon maybe, or a deer straying too close. I did not look. I could not. The next morning, everything seemed untouched. The firewood was neat. The locks were secure. I convinced myself I had imagined it, that the silence was playing tricks on me. But that night was different. I poured a drink before bed, hoping it would help me relax. But by then, I already felt it like the trees were watching. As if something just beyond sight was waiting for me to notice it. Around 11, I walked into the kitchen for a refill and stopped cold. The back door was open, not wide, just an inch. But the deadbolt was still extended, not even touching the latch, as though the door had somehow slipped open without being unlocked. I knew I had locked it. I had heard the clunk of the bolt sliding into place. I even tested it twice. Now it hung open like it had never been touched. I slammed it shut, locked it again, and dragged a small table in front of it for peace of mind. The next morning, I noticed something new. Mud. Thin streaks across the floor, starting at the back door and trailing 10 feet into the living room. They weren't full footprints, just smeared lines, like someone had walked through wet ground and then scraped their boots lightly along the wood. I crouched down. They were from boots. Large ones, size 11 or 12, but they just stopped 10 feet in. No turn, no continuation. Just stopped. I searched the cabin top to bottom, loft, bathroom, cabinets. Nothing. I even crawled under the porch with a flashlight, my heart pounding so hard it hurt. Still nothing. That night I gave up on sleeping. I sat in the main room with the lamp on, reading some old paperback about hiking disasters, though I barely absorbed the words. My eyes kept drifting to the back door, to the bolt, to the floor. Then, around midnight, the sound came again. The front screen door creaked, the same soft, drawn-out moan of a hinge under pressure. I froze, breath shallow. But after that, silence. When I glanced at the mantel clock, I noticed something. Worse, it had stopped. The hands frozen at 9:42. I leaned closer. The second hand twitched once backward, twice forward, and then stopped again. It was as if time itself had stuttered. Around 3 in the morning, I saw it, a light, moving through the trees. At first, I thought it was moonlight catching on something. But then it flickered. A dim swinging glow like an old lantern. It moved slowly, weaving between the trees. Without thinking, I stepped onto the porch and called out, "Hello?" The light didn't react. It just drifted, steady and unchanging. I walked toward it, boots crunching softly on gravel. It moved too, not away, not closer, just deeper into the woods, always keeping the same distance. I followed maybe 30 feet before I stopped. My skin felt tight, the air pressing in on me. When I turned back toward the cabin, my blood ran cold. The back door was wide open again. I sprinted. I slammed it shut, shoved the heavy table in front of it, and stood there panting, shaking, trying to breathe. Then I heard it. Bootsteps. From upstairs. Slow, heavy, pacing across the loft above me. That was impossible. No one had gotten past me. I had been watching every door, but the steps kept moving. Back and forth, deliberate. I stood at the base of the stairs for what felt like hours before finally climbing. Each step dragged, my legs trembling. When I reached the top, the loft was empty, the bed untouched. My bag zipped shut exactly where I left it. But I know what I heard. I stayed awake in that chair until daylight. Boots on, bag packed, keys in hand, and the second the first crack of morning light slipped through the shutters, I walked out the door and never looked back. This happened during a solo camping trip in Kentucky just a couple of years ago. At the time, I was completely burned out. You know, the kind of exhaustion where even the microwave beeping feels like a personal attack. That's where I was. Work had been endless, constant meetings, deadlines piling up, Slack notifications buzzing every 10 seconds. Even my own apartment, normally my safe place, had started to feel suffocating. So I made a decision. I blocked off a weekend, told everyone I'd be somewhere with no cell service, which was true, and packed for a 2-night trip into the woods. Just me, my tent, and hopefully no one else for miles. I remembered something a former coworker, Marcus, had once told me. Years back, he stumbled across a hidden camping spot in Red River Gorge, Kentucky. It wasn't on any official map, not the kind of place you could just Google. He said if you followed a dirt trail past a broken sign and an old fence post, and kept walking until you spotted what looked like a makeshift fort, you'd find a clearing. He called it the quietest place he'd ever been. That's exactly what I was looking for. I left Friday morning. The drive from Louisville took hours, the last stretch nothing but gravel roads, potholes, and the kind of silence that makes you wonder if you've already gone too far. Finally, I spotted what had to be the trailhead Marcus described, a narrow path half swallowed by weeds. I pulled over, grabbed my pack, and started the hike. It took nearly 2 hours to reach the clearing. The trail climbed higher than I expected, and by the time I stepped into that open space, my legs felt like rubber and my shirt was soaked through. But it was worth it. The place was perfect. A wide, flat circle tucked between towering trees, a natural wall of green. The ground was soft but not muddy, and someone before me had built a fire ring with blackened stones. No car sounds, no voices. Not even the faint hum of power lines, just a stillness that felt heavy, like the world itself was holding its breath. I pitched the tent, unpacked a cooler with food, a couple of mini liquor bottles, my flashlight, and knife. When the fire was going, I roasted hot dogs, cracked open a drink, and stared into the flames for what felt like hours. For the first time in weeks, my brain was quiet. I even laughed at how ridiculously peaceful it was. But peace doesn't last forever. Just as the sun dipped, I heard it. Movement. Heavy, deliberate steps in the trees behind me. Not the light scurrying of an animal, but weight, branches shifting, leaves crunching. I swung my headlamp without thinking, and in that split second, I saw someone, between the trees, already half turned away, broad shoulders, a jacket, the brim of a hat, no face. Just a silhouette slipping deeper into the woods. "Hey," I called out. My own voice sounded strange, muffled, like the clearing swallowed it whole. "You camping out here too?" No reply. I waited, then tried again. Lighter this time, all good. Just didn't expect to see anyone out here. Still silence. I told myself it was probably a hiker, maybe someone passing through who didn't feel like talking. But after that, I couldn't shake the feeling of eyes watching from the trees. An hour later, it happened again. Rustling this time from the opposite side of the clearing, as if something or someone was circling me. My grip tightened around the knife. I flicked the flashlight in that direction. Nothing. Just endless trees. I didn't call out this time. I just listened, waiting. Eventually, I forced myself back into the tent. Zipped the sleeping bag up to my chin, knife beside me. The forest outside was eerily silent. No owls, no insects. Nothing. And silence in the woods is never good. At some point, I drifted off. But I woke in the middle of the night to a sound that made my stomach clench. A soft, dragging sound against the tent wall. Something or someone was slowly running fingers along the fabric, tracing the outline of my head. I froze. Every muscle in my body locked tight. It wasn't the wind. It wasn't an animal. It was deliberate. I whispered, sharp and low, "Who's there?" Instantly, the sound stopped. Silence. No footsteps. No breathing. Nothing. I sat gripping the knife until my hand ached, then forced myself to unzip the tent just enough to peek out. The clearing looked frozen. No wind. No flicker of branches. The fire had gone out, and the trees stood perfectly still, like a photograph. I zipped the tent shut again. I didn't even try to sleep. I sat upright with the knife across my lap, headlamp pointed at the door. Waiting. Then came the sound that nearly broke me. The quiet creak of my cooler opening. It's not a loud sound, but in that silence, it might as well have been thunder. I scrambled out with the light blazing. The cooler was shut, latched, exactly where I'd left it. That's when my nerves snapped. I shouted into the trees, "What do you want?" The woods gave nothing back. I started pacing the clearing, scanning every shadow. And then I saw it. My boots. I had left them neatly by the tent flap. Now they were gone. I spun, heart hammering, and spotted them by the fire pit. Not tossed, not disturbed, just moved. Placed there carefully, side by side, as if someone had carried them and set them down with purpose. The ground around them was untouched. No footprints. Nothing. That was the most terrifying detail of all. I backed into the tent, zipped it shut, and sat there until morning, the knife never leaving my hand. Every noise outside felt like bait. Every silence felt like a test. When the first gray light seeped through the fabric, I didn't waste a second. I shoved everything into my pack, barely laced my boots, and left. Didn't eat. Didn't look back. I just walked until I saw my car, and the whole time, I couldn't shake one thought. Whatever was out there hadn't wanted to hurt me. It wanted me to know I wasn't alone. My Uncle Jasper owned a worn stretch of land just beyond the tiny town of Linwood, a place so small you could drive past it without even realizing you had. Linwood was the kind of town where time stood still. One gas station, a diner still called by its original owner's name despite 4 changes in management, and a feed store that doubled as the post office. Nothing more. Jasper's house sat about 15 minutes past that last gas station, out where the asphalt fractured into patches and the GPS spun in circles. That week, Jasper was heading north to Ohio for a trade show. He asked me to house sit. Nothing major, feed his 2 mutts, make sure the shed stayed locked, and keep an eye on things. He even promised to leave cash on the table for groceries. I didn't hesitate. I'd just come off a brutal semester, between jobs, and the thought of a quiet week in the countryside sounded like exactly what I needed. A reset button. The house, though, was not what you'd call cozy. It was old in a way that felt tired, not charming. The porch sagged under mismatched boards. The siding was once white, but had long since faded to a sickly yellow. The whole structure leaned ever so slightly, like a tired man on his cane. Every room felt tilted, off balance, as if the house itself didn't trust its own foundation. Inside, it was the same story. The living room wore faded floral wallpaper that abruptly ended at a doorway, where it gave up and turned into wood paneling in the kitchen. The furniture was heavy, built in the 70s, solid but weary. The air was dry with dust, laced with the faint tang of motor oil drifting from the garage. Behind the house stretched a field, patchy grass and weeds leading to thick woods. The trees grew so tightly together, they looked planted, too neat to be wild, yet too wild to feel managed. Uncle Jasper used to hunt out there, but beyond that tree line, it was wilderness. No houses, no trails, just trees. Endless trees. The first day passed quietly. I unpacked, fed the dogs, and explored a bit. One shed looked untouched for years, its hinges rusted solid. The other, though, was clearly in use. The dirt in front of it bore fresh tracks, and the padlock shone newer than the hinges that held it. Curiosity won. I opened it. Inside, the air smelled of sawdust and old oil. Pegboards lined with tools, each item labeled in Jasper's precise handwriting. Shelves, stacked with rope, blades, clamps, fuel. It was meticulous, almost obsessive, like walking into a museum exhibit titled the workshop. I picked up an axe, shifted a coil of rope to peek underneath, and opened a couple of drawers. Nothing out of the ordinary, yet it felt strange. Like touching things in a place that didn't want to be disturbed. I figured I'd come back later, maybe help Jasper reorganize. That night, I made instant noodles and sat at the kitchen table with my laptop. No internet, of course, but I had movies downloaded. What unnerved me wasn't the boredom, it was the silence, and not peaceful silence. Heavy silence. No bugs outside. No wind through the grass. No distant hum of cars on the highway. Just a pressing stillness that made every noise inside feel unnaturally sharp. The refrigerator door creaking, the tick of the wall clock, the groan of floorboards upstairs, it all sounded magnified. Without thinking, I locked every window. Just a quiet itch at the back of my mind telling me to be sure. Before bed, I checked the back door twice, turned the deadbolt, rattled the knob. Secure. At 2 a.m., I woke to the dogs. They weren't barking, they were screaming, the kind of sound animals make when something is wrong. I stumbled out of bed, shoved on a hoodie, and ran downstairs barefoot. The porch light flared to life as I threw open the door. And just like that, the barking stopped. The dogs stood 20 feet away, frozen, bodies stiff, eyes locked on the tree line, not moving, not growling, just staring, as if they'd seen something pass through, and were waiting for it to return. I called them. Nothing. Not even an ear flick. Heart pounding. I stepped onto the porch, the boards icy under my feet, and walked halfway to them. Still nothing. It was like they couldn't even hear me. After a long minute, I retreated back inside. From behind the glass, I watched. 10 minutes later, they turned in unison and trotted back like nothing had happened. I didn't sleep again that night. The next morning, I noticed something that made my stomach drop. The back door was cracked open. Just an inch, but open. The deadbolt was still turned. The door looked like it had been pushed outward. From the inside, I remembered checking it. Twice. I could hear Jasper's voice in my head. Always check the latch. The wind'll catch it otherwise. When I called him later, I didn't mention it. Just said the dogs were fine. But that evening, only one came when I whistled. Rusty, the old one, was still at the edge of the field. Same spot as last night. Same posture, same direction. Just staring into the trees. I approached slowly, reached for his collar. He let me lead him back, but his paws dragged, reluctant, like a child being pulled away from something. They couldn't stop watching. When I glanced back, the tall grass swayed faintly, but there was no wind. That night, I barricaded the door with a chair, locked every window twice, left the hallway light on. Sleep never came. At some point, I must have drifted, because I woke to a feeling, not a noise. A shift. The air was heavier. My bedroom door was open. I knew I had shut it. Slowly, I crept into the hallway. The kitchen was dark, but the glow from the hallway light stretched just far enough to reveal the dining chairs. They weren't where I left them. They were pulled out. Turned. Arranged in a neat arc, all facing the back door. Like an audience, waiting. The door was locked, but the curtain on the window had been pushed aside, as though someone or something had been watching. I don't know how long I stood frozen. Eventually, I pushed the chairs back. I didn't sit. I didn't turn off the light. I just locked my bedroom and hid under the covers until the sky began to gray. By the third day, I was done pretending. I packed my bag, called Jasper, and told him I wasn't feeling well. He didn't question it, just told me to drop the dogs at his neighbor Stan's place. Before leaving, I checked the shed one last time, and that's when I felt my stomach twist. Every tool I had touched that first day was back in place, exactly. The axe on its original hook, the rope recoiled. The drawers closed tight. Not just reset, restored, like someone had been there, watching, following, correcting. I slammed the shed door shut, locked it, and headed straight to the car. The dogs leapt inside without hesitation. No barking, no resistance. Just silent urgency. Dropped them at stands, handed him the key, and said Jasper would be home in a few days. I never looked back at the house. I was 16 the summer it happened. My Uncle Rick asked me to ride out with him to check on one of his old rental houses just outside Newfield, Kentucky. It sat deep in the countryside, down a long gravel road that seemed to stretch forever, through cornfields and sagging cow pastures. The kind of road that made you feel like you were driving off the map. You could go 20 minutes without seeing another living soul, just broken fences, crooked mailboxes, and barns collapsing in. The distance. Rick said he only wanted to check the place for storm damage, make sure the roof hadn't caved in or the pipes hadn't burst. But I knew better. He didn't want to go alone. And honestly, I didn't mind tagging along. Summer in a small town has a way of swallowing you in boredom, and this was at least something different. The house itself wasn't much to look at. An old white farmhouse with peeling paint and shutters warped from years of weather. The porch sagged to one side like it had given up trying to hold itself up. The last time I'd been there, I was about 9. All I remembered was the peeling wallpaper and a strange sour smell that clung to the air. I expected more of the same, a quick walkthrough, some dust, then a long ride home, but I was wrong. From the moment we pulled up, something felt off. Before we even went inside, Rick noticed the shed in the backyard. It used to be sealed with a heavy chain and a padlock so old it looked like it belonged on a prison gate. But now the padlock was gone, just gone. The chain still looped through the handles, but the ends swayed like they'd been disturbed not long before. I crouched closer, expecting to see rust or a break, but no, this metal hadn't snapped. It had been cut. Clean, sharp, almost surgical. Too perfect to be natural. Rick muttered something about the lock probably rusting through, but his voice was flat, like even he didn't believe it. Neither of us said more. We just moved to the back door. Inside, the air was heavy, thick in a way that made you work for every breath. Dust curled in lazy spirals whenever we moved, but the silence in that place was worse than the dust. It didn't sound empty, it sounded watchful. The kitchen was the first real warning. On the counter sat a plastic grocery bag, the kind you'd pick up from a gas station. Inside was a half-empty water bottle. No dust on it. The label wasn't even faded. When my arm brushed it, the plastic gave that crisp, fresh crinkle. Someone had been here recently. Rick noticed it too. He didn't say anything, but his eyes swept the room like he was trying to make sense of it. That's when I spotted the boot print. One, just one, pressed deep into the dust on the floor. Too sharp, too fresh, and alone. Where was the second print? The rest of the steps. We kept moving, but the house kept giving us signs. A chair slightly out of place. A window cracked open while all the others stayed shut. A cabinet door swinging halfway, as if someone had touched it just before we walked in. Upstairs was worse. The bathroom at the end of the hall had a towel draped neatly across the rail. I reached out without thinking and froze. It was damp. Not damp from years of moisture. Damp like someone had just used it. The bedroom door was closed tight. Rick said everything had been left open last time he checked, and something in his voice told me he remembered that clearly. I reached for the knob and stopped. I could have sworn I heard something inside. A faint shuffle. A breath, maybe. But when I leaned in, the sound was gone. Rick pulled out his phone, his voice tight as he said he was calling the sheriff. He told me to check the other rooms. I didn't want to, but I did. The first door creaked open, and the room was nearly bare. Floorboards warped, ceiling stained with water damage, an old lamp in the corner. But the closet door was cracked, just enough to see darkness waiting inside. My stomach tightened. I don't know why I opened it. Maybe I wanted proof that I was just being paranoid, but it wasn't junk inside. There was a crude bed blankets, bunched in a heap, a flattened pillow that looked like it had been dragged out of a car. Beside it, a half-empty bag of chips, still open, still fresh. I swear I could smell the salt and grease. I stumbled back, nearly tripping into Rick, who had appeared behind me. One glance at the closet, and his jaw locked tight. He whispered that the sheriff was on the way. We went downstairs, but the silence had changed. It wasn't empty anymore. The house felt like it was awake. Watching, waiting. Then we heard it. Footsteps upstairs. Real footsteps. Solid, deliberate, toe to heel. The kind you feel in the floorboards. Slow, careful, heavy. Rick didn't hesitate. He leaned in and whispered, "We're leaving, now." We didn't run, but we didn't take our time either. We stepped out onto the porch, crossed the yard, and halfway to the truck, I made the mistake of looking back. The curtain upstairs shifted, and then slowly, a pale hand curled around the edge, pulling it back. Not startled, not hurried, slow, purposeful. Like whoever it was wanted me to see them. We locked ourselves in the truck and waited. Eventually, the deputies arrived, 3 of them, no sirens, just flashlights cutting through the dark. They searched the house top to bottom, every room, every corner. 15 minutes later, they came back out. "House is empty," one of them said. But then he asked a question that froze Rick in place. "Was the attic door supposed to be open?" Rick blinked. "No, that thing's been nailed shut for years, unsafe floorboards, it's sealed." The deputy shook his head. "Not anymore. Nails are all over the floor, doors hanging loose. Looks like someone's been using it." That night, Rick went back with a hammer and nails. He boarded it shut himself, sealed the windows, checked every lock. And on the drive home, he didn't say a single word. I was working the night shift at a lonely gas station off Route 28, not far from a quiet little place called Marlow, Kentucky. To call it a town would have been generous. It was more like a handful of buildings pretending to be one. If you blinked while driving by, you'd never even know it existed. The station itself stood apart from everything else. A squat concrete block surrounded by gravel, weeds, and a thin stretch of trees that always seemed to creep closer after sunset. At night, those trees didn't just look like trees. They looked like shadows watching from the edge of the lot. The only sign of life was the buzzing neon sign above the pumps, its pink and blue glow flickering against the cracked pavement. The way it lit the place made everything look wrong, like colors that didn't belong in this world. Inside, the station had its own character. The air was thick with stale coffee, burnt dust from the heater vents, and that permanent tang of motor oil that clung to your clothes long after you left. The floors had rubber mats that curled at the corners, the kind that squeaked when you walked across them. I worked there 4 nights a week, 6 to midnight, sometimes later if Ron, the manager, couldn't be bothered to lock up himself. Honestly, I didn't mind. It was boring, predictable. Most of the customers were regulars, truckers looking for jerky and caffeine, locals grabbing cigarettes, or a couple of folks who came in just to escape the silence of their own homes. I'd grown used to the solitude. In fact, I liked it. I learned every little sound this building made. The soft hum of the coolers, the delayed clank of the air conditioning when it kicked on, even the way the storage room door settled into its frame with a dull thunk. Knowing those sounds gave me a sense of control. If everything stayed the same, then nothing unexpected could happen. But that night proved me wrong. Any other. I clocked in early, brewed a pot of coffee no one would drink, and restocked the energy drinks. Around 6:30, 2 guys in reflective vests came in, bought snacks, and left without a word. Then Mr. Daltrey, an old farmer from the outskirts of Marlow, wandered in for a 50-pound sack of goat feed. He always paid in exact change, always offered the same polite smile, and always thanked me like I was doing something important. By 7 o'clock, the place was dead. I wiped down the coffee station, rotated the chip bags, and straightened the stack of t-shirts no one ever bought. That's when I noticed the back door. It was open. Not wide, just cracked an inch, but that was enough. That door was heavy steel, the kind that groaned when you moved it, and I always locked it the second my shift started. Ron was strict about it. My chest tightened. Maybe I forgot. Maybe I got distracted. Maybe someone had slipped inside without me seeing. I walked over, pushed it shut, locked it tight, and even tugged hard to make sure it held. It didn't budge. Just a door, I told myself. Just a door. But when I turned back to the counter, something else made my stomach drop. The gum display. I'd straightened it earlier as part of my little ritual. But now, every pack peppermint, spearmint, cinnamon was lined up perfectly, every logo facing forward, every edge spaced evenly like someone had measured it with a ruler. That wasn't me. I opened the register, hoping for a distraction. But that felt wrong too. The bills weren't stacked the way I'd left them. Some were upside down, some folded at the corners, others jutting out like someone had rifled through them. Then I saw the wall clock. It read 7:48. My phone, however, still said 7:29, almost a 20-minute jump. I froze. The clock had matched earlier. I remembered because I texted my girlfriend right before I brewed the coffee. There was no way I lost 20 minutes just wiping counters. I called Ron. Straight to silence. No ring, no voicemail. Just dead air. I tried again. Nothing. Tried the landline. Nothing. Full bars, no service. That's when the station felt wrong. Too still, like the building itself was holding its breath. The buzz of the neon sign outside, the hum of the coolers. Every sound seemed sharper, not louder, just unnatural. Like they were covering up something else. Against my better judgment, I walked toward the coolers. Maybe I thought I'd find a reason. But when I got there, my heart nearly stopped. Every single cooler door was wide open. I knew I had closed them. I always closed them. And the top shelf, the one I'd just stocked with sodas? Empty. Every bottle, every can, gone. That's when I noticed the footprints. Fresh, muddy boot. Prints, damp enough to leave streaks across the tile. They trailed in from the front door, but I hadn't heard the door chime. I hadn't seen anyone come in. No tires outside. No footsteps. The prints led past the candy aisle and ended at the supply closet in the stockroom. My chest went tight. I had left that closet open earlier. I remembered leaving the paper towels stacked on the counter. Now the door was closed. And then, the lights went out. No flicker, no warning. Just darkness. My hands shook as I pulled my phone from my pocket, flicked on the flashlight. The beam cut across the floor, and I followed the muddy prints with the light. They stopped, right in front of the closet door. I whispered it out loud, more to convince myself than anything. I'm not opening that. And I meant it. I started backing away, careful not to make a sound. My flashlight beam bounced off the shelves, casting shadows that seemed to lean toward me, stretching just a little too far. I reached the front door, yanked the handle, but it wouldn't move. No latch, no rattle. It was fused to the frame, like it had never been a door at all. Then the bathroom door at the back slammed open with a violent crack that echoed through the dark. I almost dropped my phone. My body reacted before my brain did. I sprinted behind the counter, shoved the emergency exit, and threw my full weight against it. The bar gave way, and the door flew open. I stumbled into the gravel lot, gasping like I'd been underwater, then ran. I didn't look back. I didn't stop until I hit the diner a quarter mile down the road. Its lights were still on, and the guy behind the counter just stared at me as I burst inside. I didn't explain. I just begged to use the phone. When I finally turned back toward the station, everything looked normal. Lights on. Doors shut. Neat. Perfect. Like nothing had happened at all. But I know what I saw. And I never went back. I was 24 the year I started working the front counter at the Old Briar Tavern. From the outside, it looked like something pulled straight from a painting. Weathered wood, uneven stonework, and a structure that seemed to be stitched together with history instead of nails. Locals swore the building was older than Tennessee itself. Its stone walls, stacked by hand back in '79, still stood like they dared the world to try and tear them down. The tavern sat on the edge of Dandridge's historic district, wedged between a forgotten row of antique shops and a church whose bell hadn't rung in decades. People didn't just come for the food or the bourbon, they came for the stories. Every low ceiling beam and crooked staircase whispered of another century. The mugs looked like museum pieces. The floorboards groaned like they'd grown tired of holding secrets. Each room inside carried a name, most after outlaws, riverboat captains, and generals who'd supposedly passed through. But the most famous by far was the Clayton Room. Guests loved it because Elijah Clayton, a notorious bank robber, was shot dead inside, and rumor said he never really left. The staff leaned into that legend. We had framed plaques in each room explaining its history, and a laminated sheet called Haunted Highlights that I was told to hand out with a grin and a bourbon flight. At first, I thought it was all just for fun. I didn't believe in ghosts. I liked the atmosphere, the cobwebs, the creaky doors. It made for great conversation. When guests asked, I'd share the stories with a wink. A girl seen sprinting through the dining room, shadows darting at the edge of mirrors, Clayton rattling the handle of his locked room. But none of it felt real. At least not for the first 2 weeks. The change came quietly, the way these things often do. One late night, I stayed behind after closing to restock the bar. The place was empty, quiet enough to hear the fridge compressor hum and the old plumbing groan. I was stacking glasses when I heard footsteps upstairs. Not heavy, not hurried, careful, heel to toe. The kind of walk people use when they don't want to be noticed. I assumed it was Dennis, the night porter, so I called out. No answer. Still uneasy, I climbed the staircase. The second floor stretched out long and narrow, the carpet run or so worn you could see the floorboards through the threads. I stood there listening. Nothing. I checked each unlocked room. Empty. Silent. Finally, I went back down, repeating the excuse we all used. Old buildings make old noises. I said it over and over, trying to convince myself. But the excuses didn't last. A few nights later, I was passing the Clayton Room while dropping off towels. It was locked, unoccupied, and the key was still behind the desk. Yet as I walked by, I heard it click. The sound of the latch turning from the inside. I froze. Slowly, I touched the knob. It was cold. And now, it wasn't locked. I pushed the door open. The room was pitch black, bed perfectly made, windows sealed. Exactly how it should have been. Except there was this sound. A low, irregular hum. Not quite music, not quite static. Somewhere between a broken radio and a failing fluorescent light. Then something brushed my arm. Not air, not fabric. It was weightless but sharp like a freezing breeze with form. I yanked my hand back, slammed the door, and bolted down the stairs. After that, I couldn't laugh off the stories anymore. Not long after, Mrs. Bay Gibbons stopped by. Everyone in Dandridge knew her. Her family had run the tavern generations ago. Now she visited whenever a new employee started. That night, she ordered her usual rye, no ice, and asked casually, "You've heard him yet?" I frowned. Heard who? She lifted her glass toward the ceiling. Clayton. Room 13. You'll know it's him when you hear his boots. He walks heavy. Doesn't like being ignored. Her words hit harder than I expected. She tapped her glass on the counter like knocking on a coffin lid. Then she told me something I hadn't heard before. Elijah Clayton was shot in the hallway just outside his room. Tried to crawl to the door, but didn't make it. Some nights, she whispered, I still hear him pacing, left to right to left, never leaving. And she wasn't the only one. A writer from Columbus was staying in the Maple Room, which shares a wall with Clayton's. He came back from dinner pale, unsettled. He said he'd heard music's off piano, hesitant, almost like someone practicing a forgotten song. He laughed nervously when the front desk told him the truth. There was no piano in the tavern. Not anymore. A few nights later, I heard it myself. I'd locked up and shut off the lights when I caught the sound. A fragile melody floated down from the second floor, the kind that stumbles like someone relearning it note by note. My blood ran cold because I knew there hadn't been a piano in the building for years. Still, I followed the sound, pressed my ear to the wall of the Clayton room. Silence, but the wood was warm. Too warm, like someone had just been standing on the other side. The night that broke me happened just past midnight. The tavern was dark, the windows glowing with pale moonlight. I was in the back office counting bottles for inventory. I'd locked every door. I knew I had. That's why when the office door creaked open, my body froze. Not a slam, not a draft. Just slow, steady movement. Then came the footsteps, heavy, deliberate. Clack, clack, growing closer. My chest tightened as the air turned ice cold. My breath misted in front of me. Then the sound stopped right behind me. A shape of a word filled the air, more force than voice. Just one command, go. I bolted. Left the lights on. Left the paperwork, my bag, everything. I didn't even shut the office door. I ran straight out into the night and didn't stop until I was blocks away. I quit the next morning. No explanations. Just left my badge and apron on the counter and walked out. I changed my number, ignored every call from the tavern. Dennis texted once, "You okay?" I never replied. Sometimes I still pass through Dandridge. The tavern is still there, standing stubborn against time. It looks the same, maybe a little more weathered. But there's one thing that never changes. One of the second floor windows, the one above the Clayton room, always sits cracked open, always. Even in the dead of winter, when snow piles on the sill, no one ever closes it, and I don't go inside. Not anymore. My dad always believed that a little hard work in the middle of nowhere could build character. That's how I ended up spending a chunk of my summer at my Uncle Rick's place out in rural Kentucky. His land sat far past anything you'd call civilization, so far out that you lost cell signal halfway down the dirt road and only got it back if you climbed a certain hill and stood still like some kind of human lightning rod. Out there, it was nothing but trees, fields, and silence. The house itself was as worn out as the land. A single-story rectangle that looked like it had sunk too deep into the earth. The siding peeled and flaked like old skin. The porch sagged under its own weight, and the stairs groaned every time you tested them, as if warning you not to come closer. Behind the house stretched acres of dense woods. In daylight, they almost felt calm, quiet, green, alive, but at night, it was different. At night, the trees seemed to lean in, as if they were watching, listening. The first week, I didn't think much of it. Uncle Rick had me working from sunup to sundown hauling chopped wood, cleaning out a mildew-soaked shed, patching up fences that looked ready to collapse with the next storm. By evening, I was sore, filthy, and ready to pass out. After dinner, Rick usually left. He said he liked to play cards with buddies in town, sometimes at a place called Dolly's. I never knew if Dolly's was a bar or a woman. Either way, it left me alone in that old house most nights. At first, I didn't mind. I'd sit on the couch with a book or crack open the screen door, letting in the sounds of crickets and frogs. Their buzzing filled the silence like static. Sometimes I even fell asleep with the windows open, cool air drifting in. It was simple, peaceful, until night 4. That's when everything started to shift. The first thing was small, forgettable, almost. I'd left a ceramic mug on the counter before bed, half full of water. When I woke up, it was gone. I found it later in the sink, rinsed, turned upside down, neatly set like someone had done the dishes. But Rick hadn't come home. He'd stayed with a friend after a late poker game. I stared at that cup far too long, telling myself maybe I'd done it without remembering. People go on autopilot sometimes, right? Still, it gnawed at me. The next morning, it happened again, but worse. My boots. I'd left them by the back door, muddy, laces undone, caked with dirt from the fields. When I woke up, they were spotless, perfectly side by side against the wall, laces tied into neat bows the way my mom used to do when I was a kid. The floor around them was swept clean, no mud, no leaves, no dust. Just polished wood. My chest tightened. Sleepwalking? No. And what kind of prank was it for someone to sneak into a house just to clean? When I told Uncle Rick, he laughed, handed me a beer, and said maybe I'd started doing chores in my sleep. I laughed too, but the unease in my stomach only grew heavier. 2 nights later, I woke to the sound of the back screen door creaking open. Not loud, just that slow, drawn-out squeal of old hinges, shifting just enough to let something slip inside. I froze under the blanket, my heartbeat slamming against my ribs. I waited for footsteps, for anything. But the silence stretched on, thicker than the dark itself. When I finally got up, every light switch I touched sounded deafening in the stillness. The door was latched shut, locked, just as I'd left it. But something in me knew better. That's when I saw it. On the kitchen table, placed neatly in the center, was a folded napkin. My hands shook as I picked it up. In uneven, childlike handwriting, one word stared back at me: stay. That was the moment things stopped being strange and became something else entirely. Something wrong. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the armchair, watching the windows as the sky shifted from black to gray to pale morning. I kept waiting for a figure to appear in the glass. None did. The next day, I barely spoke. Rick either didn't notice or chose not to. I thought about telling him, but what could I say? Someone's sneaking in at night to clean the house and leave creepy notes? I didn't want to sound insane. That night, Rick went to a neighbor's to play cards and warned me he'd be out late. This time I locked every door, double-checked every window, and dragged a chair against the back door for good measure. I left the living room lights on and eventually drifted into an uneasy sleep. Then I woke up. No dream, no sound. Just awake. Heart pounding like something had ripped me from sleep on purpose. I stayed still, straining to listen. That's when I heard it. A slow shuffle across the porch. Not boots, not shoes, bare feet. Dragging, sliding, moving deliberately across the wooden boards. And then, silence. I didn't move. Didn't breathe. I was certain that if I did, I'd hear the door creak or worse. I wouldn't. When sunlight finally came, I forced myself outside. At first, everything looked normal. The woods were still. The porch was empty. But then I saw them, footprints. Bare human footprints pressed deep into the mud, leading from the woods to the porch. No tread, no shoes. Just naked feet. And here's the part that still makes my skin crawl. The trail stopped at the porch. No footprints going back. No path leading away. Just a straight line toward the house. And nothing else. I didn't wait for more. I shoved everything I owned into my duffel bag, walked down the gravel road into town, ears straining for footsteps behind me. I sat in the diner, drinking cup after cup of thin coffee, until Rick showed up. When he did, I told him everything. Every detail. He just shook his head, said it was probably some local messing around. Maybe a hunter, maybe a kid, harmless. That's what he called it. Harmless. I didn't argue. I just told him one thing. I wasn't going back.